Look in the mirror. Who is that looking back at you? No, not the physical form, the presence behind those eyes, the one who says, I. This question has echoed through the halls of human consciousness since we first gained the ability to reflect upon ourselves. From the ancient caves where shamans painted their visions, to the modern laboratories where neuroscientists map neural correlates of consciousness, humans have been fascinated by this persistent sense of I-ness. The ego, that mysterious character who claims authorship of our thoughts, ownership of our experiences, and centrality in our personal narrative. This presence, this unmistakable sense of being someone, precedes all other questions and underlies all other investigations. It is the fundamental mystery that each human being must confront. Throughout history, every culture has grappled with this question in its own way. The Vedantic sages of India spoke of the ego as ahamkara, the I maker, a mechanism of consciousness that creates the illusion of separateness. The ancient Greeks inscribed, "Know thyself," on the temple of Apollo. But what self were they pointing to? Buddhist philosophers developed elaborate maps of consciousness, identifying ego as both the source of suffering and the gateway to liberation. Even modern psychology, born in the consulting rooms of Sigmund Freud, placed ego at the center of its theoretical framework, seeing it as the mediator between primal drives and social demands. Each tradition, in its own way, recognized that understanding the nature of ego is central to understanding the human condition and the possibility of transformation. But why does this question matter? In an age of artificial intelligence, space exploration, and quantum computing, why should we care about this ancient riddle of selfhood? Because, as we stand at the crossroads of human evolution, understanding the nature of ego might be the key to our collective future. The challenges we face, from environmental destruction to social fragmentation, can be traced back to a fundamental misunderstanding of who and what we are. The ego, with its insistence on separation and competition, has created a world that reflects its own fragmentary nature. Yet within this very crisis lies an unprecedented opportunity for awakening to our deeper nature and true potential as conscious beings. The time has come to look deeper, to pierce through the veil of assumptions about who we think we are. This exploration isn't just philosophical musing, it's a practical inquiry into the very foundation of human experience. As we embark on this journey, we'll draw upon ancient wisdom traditions, modern scientific insights, and direct experiential investigation. We'll examine ego from multiple angles, as a biological adaptation, a psychological construct, a quantum phenomenon, and a spiritual puzzle. The question, "Who am I?" might be ancient, but its implications have never been more relevant than in this moment of human history. This investigation has the power to transform not just our understanding of ourselves, but our entire way of being in the world. Close your eyes for a moment and try to find your ego. Where exactly is it located? In your head? Your heart? That sensation of I-ness feels so real, so central to your existence, yet when you search for it directly, it proves mysteriously elusive. This is what neuroscientists are discovering as they probe the brain's labyrinthine networks. There is no central control room, no fixed location where you reside. Instead, they find a dynamic dance of neural patterns, a symphony of interconnected processes that somehow gives rise to the persistent illusion of a unified self. The more closely science examines the brain, the more it reveals consciousness as an emergent phenomenon rather than a localized function. This understanding mirrors ancient contemplative insights about the constructed nature of self. The ego emerges from this neural activity like a rainbow appears from the interaction of sunlight and water droplets. It's real in one sense. You can see it, point to it, describe its colors, but try to grasp it and you'll find nothing solid there. This is what Buddha meant when he spoke of anatta, or no self. He wasn't denying the conventional existence of personality or individual consciousness. He was pointing to something more subtle, the lack of any fixed, independent entity we could call I. Like a whirlpool in a river, the ego is a recognizable pattern, but not a separate thing. It's a process, a dynamic activity of consciousness rather than a static entity. This understanding liberates us from the endless struggle to maintain and defend a solid sense of self. Modern complexity theory offers a fascinating perspective on this paradox. The ego, like any emergent phenomenon, arises from the complex interactions of simpler components. Just as wetness isn't found in individual water molecules, but emerges from their collective behavior, the sense of self isn't located in any particular neural circuit, but emerges from the brain's overall activity. This is why you can't find your ego through direct searching. It's not a thing but a process, not a noun but a verb. Complex systems theory shows how coherent patterns can emerge without a central controller, offering a scientific framework for understanding ego's simultaneous reality and emptiness. The implications revolutionize our understanding of consciousness itself. Yet here's the deepest paradox. This illusory self is the very one listening to these words right now, the one who feels emotions, makes decisions, and navigates daily life. How can something be both illusory and functional? This is the central mystery we must hold as we explore further. The ego is neither absolutely real nor completely unreal. Like a useful fiction, it serves a purpose while remaining fundamentally empty of inherent existence. Understanding this paradox is the first step toward a more mature relationship with our own nature. The ego can be simultaneously honored as a necessary function of human consciousness and seen through as a constructed phenomenon. This recognition opens the door to a profound transformation in our relationship with ourselves and existence itself. Step into the stream of your consciousness for a moment and notice how the ego weaves its endless narrative. Like a master novelist, it crafts the ongoing story of me, my past, my struggles, my triumphs, my future. This storytelling isn't occasional, it's constant, running like background software in your mental operating system. Even now, as you listen to these words, it's crafting its commentary, relating everything back to its central character, you. This narrative function isn't just a habit. It's the very essence of how ego maintains its apparent continuity. The sophistication of this storytelling mechanism is remarkable. It operates across multiple timelines simultaneously, weaving past memories, present interpretations, and future projections into a seamless narrative that feels undeniably real and personal. Consider how this story begins. Your earliest memories aren't just stored, they're curated. The ego selects, edits, and continually revises your personal history to maintain a coherent narrative. That embarrassing moment in third grade, that first kiss, that career triumph, these aren't just memories. They're carefully maintained plot points in your personal mythology. The fascinating part is how this story gets updated in real time. Every new experience is instantly woven into the existing narrative, either reinforcing the established plot or creating tension that demands resolution. This active curation process never stops. Even during sleep, your brain continues to consolidate and revise memories to fit your ongoing narrative, ensuring that your sense of self maintains consistency across time and experience. But here's where it gets really interesting. This storytelling mechanism operates largely outside our awareness. Neuroscience reveals that our brains are literally wired for narrative coherence. The left hemisphere, in particular, functions as an interpreter, constantly generating explanations for our experiences and actions, even when those explanations are demonstrably false. Split brain studies show how this interpreter will confabulate elaborate stories to maintain narrative consistency, even in the face of contradictory evidence. This isn't lying. It's the ego doing what it does best, maintaining the story. The sophistication of this meaning-making process suggests it's fundamental to human consciousness itself. not merely a psychological overlay, but a core feature of how our minds construct reality. The implications are profound. You are not just living your life, you are constantly authoring it. The ego isn't just telling stories about your experience, it's shaping your experience through its storytelling. Your future possibilities are limited or expanded by the narrative you maintain about who you are. This is why genuine transformation often requires a radical revision of our personal mythology. The great wisdom traditions understood this. They weren't just teaching new beliefs, they were offering new stories about who we fundamentally are. Understanding this narrative function of ego opens up extraordinary possibilities for conscious transformation. We can begin to witness and even participate in the storytelling process rather than being unconsciously driven by it. Watch your mind for a few seconds and notice how rarely it stays in the present moment. The ego is a time traveler, constantly shuttling between past and future, reviewing memories, or projecting scenarios yet to come. This temporal mobility isn't just a quirk, it's fundamental to how ego maintains its existence. The present moment is actually ego's greatest challenge because presence requires no story, no reference point, no me to maintain. This is why meditation, the art of present moment awareness, can feel like ego dissolution. In fact, neuroscience reveals that regions of the brain associated with self-referential thinking show decreased activity during moments of pure presence, suggesting that ego's grip on consciousness naturally loosens when we fully enter the now. This capacity for mental time travel, while sometimes problematic, is also one of humanity's most remarkable evolutionary adaptations. The mechanism of this time travel is fascinating from a neuroscientific perspective. The same neural networks that allow us to remember the past are also used to imagine the future. This is why people with memory impairments often struggle to envision future scenarios. The ego uses this time-traveling capacity to maintain its continuity, creating what feels like a solid, permanent self moving through time. But here's the paradox. This variability, which helped our species survive by learning from the past and planning for the future, can also trap us in a psychological prison of regret and anxiety. Research shows that excessive mental time travel correlates strongly with depression and anxiety disorders, suggesting that ego's temporal mobility, while useful, needs to be balanced with the ability to fully inhabit the present moment. Time, as Einstein showed us, isn't the fixed, linear progression we once thought. It's relative, flexible, and intimately connected with consciousness. The ego creates psychological time, the felt sense of a past that trails behind us and a future that stretches ahead. But in reality, all we ever have is this moment. The past exists only as present memory, the future only as present imagination. The ego's time-traveling nature is both its power and its limitation. It allows us to learn and plan, but it can also prevent us from experiencing the fullness of now. Modern physics' understanding of time as a dimension rather than a flow adds another layer to this insight, suggesting that our experience of temporal sequence might be more about consciousness than about reality itself. When we truly inhabit the present moment, something remarkable happens. The ego's usual activity becomes transparent. We can see how it constantly reaches into remembered past or imagined future to maintain its story. This is why spiritual teachers throughout history have emphasized present moment awareness. They're not just offering a technique for relaxation, they're pointing to the place where ego's fundamental mechanism can be seen and understood. In pure presence, we discover what we are beyond the time-bound ego. This timeless awareness, which mystics have pointed to throughout history, appears to be a fundamental property of consciousness itself, the unchanging background against which all temporal experience occurs. Understanding this opens the possibility of living from a deeper dimension of being while still engaging with time in practical ways. Identity is not built in isolation, but forged in the crucible of social interaction. From your first moments of life, the ego begins its work as a social architect, constructing boundaries between self and other, crafting responses to gain love and avoid rejection, building the complex edifice of personality. This isn't just psychological theory. Developmental neuroscience shows how our neural networks are literally shaped by early social interactions. The mirror neurons that fire both when we act and when we observe others acting form the biological foundation of this social construction. Language plays a crucial role in this architectural process. Notice how your sense of self is intimately wrapped in words. I, me, mine. These aren't just convenient labels, but the very building blocks of ego identity. Vygotsky, the pioneering psychologist, demonstrated how inner speech shapes cognitive development. Your internal dialogue, that constant commentary running through your mind, isn't just thinking. It's the ego constantly reinforcing its existence through language. This verbal scaffolding becomes so familiar that we rarely question its role in maintaining our sense of self. The social nature of ego reveals itself most clearly in how we modify our behavior and self-presentation depending on context. You're one person with your parents, another with your colleagues, yet another with your intimate partner. Each version feels authentic in the moment, yet they can't all be the real you. The ego masterfully manages these multiple identities, switching between them so smoothly that we rarely notice the transitions. Social psychology experiments have shown how dramatically our behavior can shift based on social context, yet the ego maintains the illusion of a consistent self. Modern social media has made this architectural process more visible than ever. Watch how people construct their online identities, carefully curating their presentations, seeking likes and validation. This isn't vanity. It's the ego doing what it has always done, just with new tools. The construction of self has become literal, digital, visible. Yet beneath all these constructed identities, these carefully maintained social facades, something more fundamental exists, a presence that witnesses all these variations without being limited by any of them. This is what spiritual teachers point to when they speak of your true nature beyond social conditioning. At its core, the ego functions as a sophisticated defense mechanism, a psychological immune system protecting what it perceives as the self. Like a vigilant guardian, it constantly scans for threats, not just physical dangers, but anything that might challenge its constructed sense of identity. Watch how quickly it reacts to criticism, how efficiently it justifies its actions, how skillfully it maintains its boundaries. This defensive nature isn't a flaw in the system. It's the system's primary function, developed over millions of years of evolution to ensure psychological survival. The sophistication of this defense system is remarkable. It operates at multiple levels simultaneously, from basic physiological responses to complex psychological strategies, all coordinated to maintain the integrity of your self-image. Modern neuroscience reveals how this defensive functioning is deeply embedded in our neural architecture, with the amygdala and other limbic structures constantly monitoring for threats to our psychological as well as physical safety. The ego's defensive strategies are remarkably sophisticated. It employs a vast array of mechanisms: rationalization to explain away uncomfortable truths, projection to attribute its own unacceptable qualities to others, denial to avoid facing threatening realities. These aren't just theoretical concepts from psychology textbooks. They're active processes operating in your consciousness right now. Notice how your mind reacts to ideas that challenge your self-image, how quickly it moves to defend its established positions, how automatically it rejects information that doesn't fit its existing narrative. Each defense mechanism serves a specific purpose in maintaining psychological stability, yet together they form an interconnected system of self-protection that can become so habitual we forget it's operating. The brilliance of these strategies lies in their ability to operate largely outside our awareness, protecting us from psychological pain while maintaining a sense of coherence and continuity. The intensity of ego's defensive responses often correlates directly with the magnitude of the perceived threat to identity. This explains why spiritual teachings that point to the illusory nature of self can trigger such strong resistance. The ego literally feels like it's fighting for its life, because, in a way, it is. This is why genuine spiritual work often involves facing and moving through layers of defense mechanisms. Each surrender, each letting go of a defended position, feels like a small death, because, for the ego, it is. Understanding this dynamic helps us approach personal growth with more compassion. These defenses weren't created to limit us but to protect us, and they carry the wisdom of our past experiences. The key lies in recognizing when these once necessary protections have become limitations. Yet here lies a profound paradox. The ego's very attempt to defend itself often creates the suffering it seeks to avoid. Its strategies of resistance, while necessary for psychological survival, can become prison walls limiting our growth and authenticity. This is why the great wisdom traditions speak of surrender, of letting go, of dying before you die. They're pointing to the possibility of finding security not through defense, but through transcendence, discovering what we are beyond the defended ego structure. This doesn't mean the ego's defensive function disappears. Rather, it becomes transparent, a known aspect of our functioning, rather than the core of our identity. When we understand this deeply, we can begin to work with our defensive patterns rather than from them, allowing for a more fluid and adaptive relationship with life while maintaining healthy boundaries where needed. Enter the dark room of your psyche, where the ego performs its most intricate dance, the constant waltz with its own shadow. Carl Jung illuminated this territory, showing how the ego maintains its preferred self-image by exiling parts of our nature into the shadow realm. These aren't just the dark or negative aspects. Sometimes our greatest potential, our deepest gifts, are what we hide from ourselves. Watch how the ego pirouettes away from certain thoughts, certain emotions, certain potentials. This graceful avoidance is the shadow dance, as natural as breathing, yet profound in its consequences. The shadow isn't simply our dark side. It's everything the ego refuses to acknowledge about itself. That critical inner voice that sounds suspiciously like your parent. Shadow. That quality you can't stand in others. Likely shadow. That secret dream you've never admitted, even to yourself. Shadow. The fascinating part is how the ego maintains this division, this split between acceptable and unacceptable aspects of self. It requires constant energy, like a psychological immune system, identifying and suppressing whatever doesn't fit its chosen narrative. Modern neuroscience reveals the neural correlates of this shadow dance through studies of unconscious processing. Your brain makes decisions seconds before you're consciously aware of them, processes emotional information without your knowledge, responds to stimuli you never consciously register. The ego, floating like the visible tip of an iceberg, maintains the illusion of complete control while vast processes unfold in the depths below. This isn't a design flaw, it's how the system was meant to operate, allowing for complexity beyond ego's limited conscious bandwidth. The path to wholeness requires learning to dance with our shadows consciously. Every great wisdom tradition includes practices for shadow integration: confession in Christianity, shadow yoga in Tantra, radical acceptance in Buddhism. They understood that true transformation isn't about the ego becoming perfect. It's about expanding our conscious relationship with all that we are, including the denied and rejected parts. When we learn to embrace our shadows, they transform from sources of shame or fear into wellsprings of creativity and authenticity. Look into the eyes of another person, and you'll find yourself looking into a mirror. The ego doesn't exist in isolation. It's part of a vast fractal pattern of relationship, each individual consciousness reflecting and being reflected by countless others. This isn't poetic metaphor. It's observable reality. Notice how your sense of self shifts and adjusts in different relationships, how you see your own qualities reflected in others, how every significant relationship becomes a mirror showing you different aspects of yourself. The ego is not just a personal construct. It's a node in an infinite network of interconnected consciousness. Modern attachment theory reveals how our earliest relationships create templates that shape all future connections. These aren't just psychological patterns. They're neural networks wired into our brains through repeated interactions. The mirror neuron system, discovered by neuroscientists studying primate behavior, shows how deeply we're wired for resonance with others. When you watch someone perform an action, the same neural circuits activate as if you were performing it yourself. This mirroring happens automatically, below the level of conscious awareness, creating a constant dance of mutual influence. The fractal nature of ego reveals itself most clearly in conflict. When something triggers you in another person, you're often seeing a disowned part of yourself. The qualities that most irritate you in others are frequently the same ones you've pushed into your own shadow. This principle, known in psychology as projection, operates like a psychological hologram, each fragment containing reflections of the whole. Family systems therapy builds on this understanding, showing how individual egos are part of larger systemic patterns that repeat across generations. Each relationship becomes an opportunity for self-knowledge, each interaction a chance to see yourself more clearly. The ego, designed to maintain boundaries and separation, paradoxically finds its deepest truth in connection. This is why spiritual practices often emphasize relationship, whether with a teacher, a community, or all of existence. The boundaries of self become more permeable, more transparent, revealing the underlying unity that the ego's separative tendencies normally obscure. We begin to recognize ourselves in everyone we meet, not as a philosophical concept, but as lived experience. In this unprecedented age of technology, the ego has found a new playground, the digital realm. Watch how seamlessly it projects itself into virtual spaces, creating carefully curated versions of self across multiple platforms. Each social media profile becomes a digital avatar, a crystallized fragment of identity crafted to attract likes, shares, and validation. This isn't just a modern phenomenon. It's the ancient human need for recognition and belonging, finding expression through new tools. The ego, ever adaptable, has learned to exist simultaneously in physical and virtual dimensions. The implications are profound and sometimes disturbing. Studies show how digital interaction affects brain chemistry, triggering dopamine releases with each notification, creating feedback loops of validation-seeking behavior. The ego, which once had to wait for social gatherings to receive recognition, now has instant access to potential validation from hundreds or thousands of others. This constant availability of social feedback has created new patterns of addiction, new forms of anxiety, new ways for the ego to become entrapped in its own reflection. Consider how digital technology has expanded the ego's capacity for storytelling. Through posts, photos, and status updates, we're constantly narrating our lives, not just living them. The gap between experience and its presentation has narrowed almost to nothing. Events aren't fully real until they're shared, filtered, and validated by the digital collective. This real-time curation of experience represents a new phase in ego evolution, where the boundary between authentic living and performance has become increasingly blurred. Yet within this digital expansion lies an opportunity for awakening. The very obviousness of our curated online personas can serve as a mirror, showing us how we construct and maintain identity in all realms of life. When we see clearly how we create and maintain our digital self-image, we can begin to recognize the same processes at work in our offline identity. The digital age, while amplifying ego's traditional patterns, also makes them more visible and thus more available for conscious examination and transformation. In the realm of quantum mechanics, where the act of observation affects the observed reality, you'll find a perfect metaphor for ego's role in consciousness. Just as the quantum observer collapses the wave function of possibility into specific reality, the ego collapses the infinite potential of consciousness into particular experiences of me. This isn't just poetic comparison. Leading physicists like David Bohm and John Wheeler have suggested that consciousness and quantum mechanics are intimately connected. The ego functions as a quantum measuring device, constantly reducing unlimited potential to limited actuality. Take, for example, the famous double-slit experiment, where particles behave differently when observed. Similarly, the moment ego brings its attention to experience, it transforms the raw data of consciousness into personal narrative. Before the ego observes and interprets, experience exists in a superposition of possibilities. After ego's observation, experience collapses into my experience. This process happens so quickly and automatically that we rarely notice it. Yet understanding this mechanism is crucial for anyone seeking to explore consciousness beyond ego's habitual patterns. The implications reach far beyond physics into the nature of reality itself. If ego is indeed a quantum observer, then its role in creating our experienced reality is far more fundamental than psychology suggests. Each moment of ego awareness isn't just interpreting reality, it's participating in reality's manifestation. This aligns with ancient wisdom traditions that speak of consciousness as the ground of being, and individual awareness as a localized expression of universal consciousness. The ego, seen this way, is both creator and created, observer and observed. Modern neuroscience adds another layer to this understanding. The brain's default mode network, active when we're self-referencing, shows similar patterns, whether we're remembering the past, imagining the future, or thinking about ourselves in the present. This suggests that ego-based consciousness operates in a fundamentally different way from pure awareness. Like a quantum measurement that fixes probability into actuality, ego fixes fluid consciousness into solid identity. Understanding this process opens the possibility of experiencing reality before ego's collapse of the wave function. Imagine your ego as a localized disturbance in an infinite field of consciousness, like a wave rising from the ocean. While the wave appears distinct, it's never separate from the ocean that gives it form. Modern quantum field theory provides a striking parallel. Particles aren't separate entities, but excitations in underlying fields. Similarly, your sense of I isn't a separate thing, but a dynamic pattern of activity in the field of awareness. This understanding bridges ancient wisdom with cutting-edge physics, offering a new way to understand identity itself. When you really observe your experience, you'll notice how identity is never fixed but constantly fluctuating. One moment you're deeply absorbed in work, the next caught in emotional reaction, then lost in memory, each state bringing its own sense of I. Like quantum particles that can't be said to have definite properties until measured, your identity remains fluid until ego fixes it through attention and identification. This quantum dance of identity happens so rapidly that we usually miss it, seeing only the apparently solid self our ego presents. Research in consciousness studies suggests that what we call self emerges from the interaction of multiple neural networks, each contributing different aspects of experience. Default mode network activity correlates with self-referential thinking, while salience network activity helps determine what enters consciousness. Like quantum fields interacting to create observable phenomena, these networks interact to create our sense of self. The ego acts as a quantum observer, collapsing these possibilities into moment-by-moment experience of identity. The practical implications are profound. If identity is more like a field than a fixed entity, then transformation becomes less about changing who you are and more about shifting the patterns of energy in your field. This aligns with both quantum physics' understanding of reality as interconnected fields and spiritual teachings about the fundamental unity of existence. Your ego isn't something to transcend or eliminate, but rather a functional pattern in the field of consciousness that can become more fluid, more responsive, more aligned with the whole. Meet the ego in its most sophisticated guise, the sacred trickster, simultaneously the greatest obstacle to awakening and the very catalyst that makes awakening possible. Like the mythological trickster figures found in cultures worldwide, ego plays a paradoxical role in the drama of consciousness. It creates the illusion of separation that causes suffering, yet this very suffering motivates the search for truth. The ego's tricks become the teaching tools of awakening, its resistance the whetstone that sharpens awareness. This dynamic mirrors ancient wisdom tales, from the Norse god Loki to the Native American coyote, where the trickster's disruptive presence ultimately serves a higher purpose in the cosmic drama. Modern depth psychology recognizes this same principle, understanding how our psychological obstacles often contain the very keys to our transformation. The ego's very resistance to growth becomes the pressure that forges spiritual diamonds. This trickster nature reveals itself most clearly in spiritual practice. Watch how ego co-opts even the most profound spiritual insights, turning them into new forms of identity. I am so spiritual. I am beyond ego. I am more enlightened. Each attempt to transcend ego becomes food for ego's growth. Yet this very process, frustrating as it may seem, serves a deeper purpose. Like a cosmic game of hide and seek, ego's tricks create the dynamic tension necessary for consciousness to recognize its own nature. Without this play of concealment and revelation, awakening might remain a mere concept rather than lived experience. The genius of ego's trickster nature lies in its ability to create the very conditions needed for its own transcendence, though it does so unknowingly, like a master teacher disguised as an adversary. This understanding transforms how we view our spiritual journey, revealing every obstacle as a hidden opportunity. Think about how ego's trickster nature operates in your own life. Those moments of greatest certainty often precede the biggest revelations of delusion. Times of apparent spiritual progress frequently lead to humbling discoveries of unconscious patterns. Rather than seeing this as a problem, wisdom traditions recognize it as the natural unfolding of awakening. The ego's tricks aren't obstacles but opportunities, each one revealing another layer of the mystery of consciousness to itself. This is why many spiritual paths incorporate trickster wisdom, using paradox and contradiction to confound ego's usual strategies. The Zen tradition particularly excels at this, using koans and sudden actions to short-circuit ego's habitual patterns of understanding. Even modern psychotherapy recognizes how our resistances often point directly to our deepest opportunities for growth. When we understand ego as sacred trickster, our relationship with it transforms. Instead of seeing it as an enemy to be defeated or a mistake to be corrected, we recognize it as a necessary player in the game of consciousness. Its very resistance becomes a gift, its obstacles stepping stones, its tricks teaching tools. This doesn't mean indulging ego's patterns, but rather engaging with them skillfully, understanding that even its most challenging manifestations serve the ultimate purpose of awakening. This perspective allows for a more playful and creative approach to spiritual development, where we learn to dance with our ego rather than battle it. The sacred trickster teaches us that the path to wisdom often leads through the territory of paradox, and that our greatest challenges may contain our most profound opportunities for awakening. In embracing this understanding, we move from spiritual warfare to spiritual artistry, recognizing ego as both the canvas and the brush in the masterpiece of consciousness. Every major spiritual tradition speaks of a necessary death, not of the physical body, but of the ego's dominance over consciousness. The mystical literature is filled with metaphors of dying before you die, of being born again, of passing through a dark night of the soul. These aren't mere poetic flourishes, but descriptions of a real psychological process that occurs as consciousness begins to awaken to its true nature. Watch how the ego responds to even the suggestion of its own dissolution. The fear, the resistance, the desperate attempt to maintain control. This very reaction points to something profound about its nature. Near-death experiences often trigger spontaneous ego death, offering a fascinating window into this process. Research shows how these experiences frequently result in dramatic personality changes, reduced fear of death, increased compassion, shifted values and priorities. The ego, having glimpsed its own temporary nature, never quite reconstitutes itself in the same way. Similar transformations can occur through deep meditation, psychedelic experiences, or profound life crises. The common thread is a temporary suspension of ego's usual functioning, allowing consciousness to recognize itself beyond individual identity. Modern neuroscience offers intriguing parallels. The default mode network, brain regions associated with self-referential thinking, shows reduced activity during meditation, psychedelic experiences, and certain types of mystical states. It's as if the neural correlates of ego temporarily go offline, allowing consciousness to experience itself without its usual filters and boundaries. This ego death isn't the end of functional identity, but rather a reset of its dominance over awareness. Like a computer reboot, it allows the system to reconfigure with new parameters. Yet here's the paradox. True ego death isn't something the ego can accomplish. Any intentional attempt at ego dissolution becomes another ego project, another form of spiritual materialism. The art lies in allowing ego death to occur naturally, through deep surrender to what is. This is why wisdom traditions emphasize acceptance and letting go rather than aggression toward the ego. The death they speak of isn't annihilation but transformation, a rebirth into a new relationship with ego where it serves rather than dominates consciousness. The journey with ego isn't about reaching a final destination, but about establishing a new relationship with this aspect of our functioning. Integration means neither indulging ego's demands nor waging war against it, but rather understanding its proper place in the ecology of consciousness. Like learning to drive a car, we neither identify with the vehicle nor try to destroy it. We simply learn to use it skillfully. This middle path of integration represents the mature approach to ego development, transcending both naive identification and reactive rejection. Consider how a skilled actor relates to their roles, fully embodying each character while remaining aware of their true identity beyond the performance. Similarly, integration allows us to fully engage with our ego functions while maintaining awareness of our deeper nature. This isn't about creating a better, more spiritual ego, but about bringing transparency to ego's operations. We learn to use its capabilities, planning, discerning, protecting, without being unconsciously driven by its fears and desires. The neuroscience of integration reveals fascinating patterns. Studies of long-term meditators show increased connectivity between brain regions associated with self-awareness and those involved in bodily sensation and emotion. This suggests that integration involves linking different levels of processing rather than eliminating any particular function. The ego becomes integrated when it's connected to both higher awareness and deeper instinctual wisdom, serving as a bridge between different aspects of our being. The fruit of integration manifests in daily life through increased flexibility, reduced reactivity, and greater capacity to respond appropriately to different situations. The integrated ego no longer needs to maintain rigid boundaries or fixed identities. Like water taking the shape of its container while retaining its essential nature, an integrated ego can adapt to circumstances without losing connection to deeper awareness. This is what wisdom traditions mean by being in the world but not of it, fully engaged while remaining inwardly free. In the end, the journey with ego brings us full circle, but at a higher turn of the spiral. Like a great novel whose ending transforms everything that came before, understanding ego's true nature changes our entire relationship with existence. The paradox resolves itself not through answering all our questions, but through transforming our way of being. We discover that ego was never the enemy, nor was it the ultimate truth of who we are. It is simply one instrument in the grand orchestra of consciousness, playing its part in the symphony of existence. This recognition brings a profound peace, not because all questions are answered, but because we finally understand the true nature of the questioner. The ego, like a skilled actor who remembers they are acting, can now play its role with both conviction and lightness. This resolution doesn't come through achievement, but through recognition. It's like waking up from a dream. The dream wasn't wrong or bad, but neither was it ultimate reality. The ego, with all its struggles and triumphs, its fears and desires, is honored as an essential aspect of human experience, while no longer being mistaken for our fundamental nature. This is what the great masters meant when they spoke of living in the marketplace with bliss-bestowing hands, fully engaged in life, while resting in the recognition of our deeper identity. In this awakened perspective, ego becomes transparent, like a clear glass through which the light of consciousness shines unobstructed, fulfilling its true function as a vessel for something far greater than itself. The practical implications ripple through every aspect of life. Relationships become less about defending boundaries and more about celebrating connection. Work becomes an expression of natural creativity rather than a means of proving worth. Even difficulties and challenges are welcomed as opportunities for growth rather than threats to identity. The ego continues to function, but now it serves rather than dominates. Like a well-trained horse that responds to the lightest touch of the reins, it becomes a powerful ally in navigating human experience. This transformed relationship with ego allows for a new kind of human functioning, one that combines the precision and effectiveness of individual identity with the boundless wisdom of universal consciousness. This return to wholeness isn't a destination, but an ever-deepening process. Each moment offers a fresh opportunity to recognize the interplay between individual expression and universal being. The ego finds its true home not in opposition to the whole, but as a unique expression of it, like a wave that knows itself as both wave and ocean simultaneously. This is the promise and potential of human consciousness. Not to transcend our humanity, but to fully embody it, ego and all, in service of the greater unfolding of awareness in form. In this recognition, every breath becomes a celebration of the mystery that we are, every moment an opportunity to dance at the intersection of the finite and infinite. We discover that wholeness was never lost, only overlooked, and that our journey of return was actually a journey of remembering what we have always been.